Have you ever been looking for a book and you know what kind of book you want, but you can't find the recommendation to go with it? Then this is the video for you. Today I wanted to recommend you guys some overly specific books. I asked on Instagram and my community tab for things that you guys have been dying for, things that you are looking for and you want more recommendations for but haven't been able to find, and I am going to try to give you some recommendations for those. I'm a little bit nervous about this because some of these were quite hard. There were a few of the requests that I honestly had not read a book for yet. I want to, but I hadn't done it yet, so I don't know that I have a recommendation for everybody, and I also only have so much time in this video. If I did not answer your recommendation request in this video, I will either A, keep thinking, and once I find one, I will go and comment on your comment, or if I just wasn't able to get to it in this video, then I will also go and recommend a book in the comments once I'm finished. So you guys will hopefully get a recommendation. Some of these were quite hard and I need to branch out. I need to read some of these books. But we're just gonna kick it off. First is from Cameron, and she wants a book where you root for the female antagonist. This one was a little bit hard for me because I think it would be kind of a spoiler if I told you too much about the female antagonist, but I will say that I think that the Lady of Darkness series, specifically Lady of Shadows, has a female antagonist that you will want to root for. I personally rooted for her. I connected to her. Even though she was doing some questionable things, I still connected and rooted for her. This is the second book in the series, but the series starts with Lady of Darkness. It is an enemies to lovers, knife to the throat romantasy with a big sprawling world. So I think that this could definitely fit that prompt. May not have been quite what you were thinking with the romantasy, but I feel like it fits. Araphismus, I think. They want a book with an underhyped villain point of view. And I was thinking on this one and was really trying to figure out what would fit for this. I think for this one, I'm going to go with The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. This is one that I read a long time ago. It's really stuck with me. I think it is such a unique fantasy book, and it definitely has a villain point of view. I don't feel like I hear anybody talking about this book, so I definitely think it fits the underhyped as well. This is a sci-fi fantasy hybrid with a touch of horror elements about a world that is being taken over by aliens every few hundred years, and they're having to fight back. It's got some great animal companions in it, it's got some really good friendships, and that villain point of view that you were looking for. Next up, Mermaid on Fire was requesting a cozy horror, but make it fantasy. For this one, I think that I have two recommendations. One is The House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. It is primarily horror, but there are definitely some fantasy elements to this one, and honestly, any of T. Kingfisher's horror would work for this, like Hollow Places and The Twisted Ones. They all have a little bit of a fantastical feel to them, but they're still very much so more horror. I do think that The House with Good Bones is probably the more cozy of those. And then Murder at Spindle Manor by Morgan Stang I think would also fit this one. It is a fantasy gas lamp murder mystery that is a lot of fun, very cozy in feel. Not necessarily horror, but definitely more of like a cozy mystery with fantasy, so I think those are the two closest recommendations that I can get for that one. Next up, Bookish Sadie is looking for a book that is an epic fantasy with a unique magic system, plot-driven and fast-paced, and requested no romance. For this one, I had a few too many options, honestly, and had to narrow things down a bit. So I did end up going with four that I'm going to quick fire off for you really quickly. The first is The Umbral Storm by Alec Hudson. This is an indie progression fantasy that I think is very fast-paced, has a super unique magic system where there are shards that you can take into your body to level up your power. Then we have The Queen of Blood by Sarah Beth Durst. This one is really unique with spirits that have elemental magic, and there is a queen that is able to control these spirits and basically make them behave, but the queen is dying and there's a competition for a new queen. Definitely feel like this has a very fast plot, very, very unique magic system. Can't remember if there's any romance in this, but if there is, it's a dash. This is definitely not romantasy. It would just be like a very small subplot. Then we have Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is a physics kind of magic system where you are able to program things things and give them rules in order to get them to do things. And I really found that magic system to be really cool. It has a lot of rules to it, which you guys know that I love a good hard magic system, and it is a slight heist-like story. And then I couldn't go without recommending The Will of the Many for this one. You guys know this was my favorite book of last year. It feels like a cop-out recommendation because everybody's probably heard about it at this point, but it absolutely still counts. Very fast-paced. I love the will magic system where you are able to give up part of your will or get part of your will in order to make yourself stronger. The ending to this is going to make the magic system, I think, even more incredible in the next book. It does have, like, I think an undercurrent of a romance, but like that is a subplot, so I think it would definitely fit for this recommendation. Next up, Love My Life 648 wants a slow burn with a lot of angst that is enemies to lovers. I have a few recommendations for you for this one. The first is going to be A Dawn of Onyx by Kate Golden. This one probably has the lowest amount of angst, but it's definitely enemies to lovers, and it is slow burn as well. We're following a girl who is a healer when she gets swept away to the kingdom of the Onyx, and they say that the king of the Onyx is very ruthless, cutthroat, and a horrible person, and she is trying to get out in order to get back to her family. This was an indie book that was picked up by Bloom Books, I believe. No, by Berkeley. The trilogy will be finished off in October of this year. We also have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This one definitely fits the angst enemies to lovers bill. It is Hunger Games mixed with Red Queen, but definitely I could see the Hunger Games vibes for sure. This has a ton of banter. It is knife to the throat, and I do feel like it's pretty slow burn. This is a young adult. It is just a good time. Let me stress that it is a very good time. It's not like the best book that I've ever read, but I had so much fun with it, and I think that you will too. And then my last recommendation for this one I think is going to be Flame and Sparrow by S.M. Gaither. This is definitely very slow. It is enemies to lovers. I feel like it is angst in the way that they are constantly pushing and pulling at one another, and I enjoyed this book quite a lot. The sequel is coming out pretty soon, and it is just a duology, so I would highly recommend this one as well. It's about elves and gods and the demigods that are kind of taking over, and she is going to potentially fall in love with one of those demigods that she hates so much. Then Night Owl Reader 2790 had a couple of things that they wanted. I could only really find a book for one of them, which was The Last, a horror book where there is good spirits or ghosts trying to help the main character stay alive or escape. Could be multiple, just one, good versus bad. I think for this one I'm going to go with the September House by Carissa Orlando. This one is one that I read that I had to kind of sit on to feel like I fully got it and enjoyed it. It definitely has some darker themes to it, but there is what you are requesting within this book overall. It has ghosts, and are there ghosts, are there not ghosts? I think that this one is going to fit your request. The only other suggestion that I had for this one was actually going to be a middle grade, which is City of Ghosts by V.E. Schwab. Definitely a good ghost helping her out in that one. She is going with her parents as they are paranormal investigators all over, but she can see ghosts, and her best friend is a ghost as well. Then Anna Moore 321 asked for a decent adult fantasy romance with little to no spice. Had read Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater and was looking for something very similar to this one. I think for this one I'm going to have to recommend A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This is an adult fantasy romance. It definitely has a pretty strong underlying romantic plot to it, but it is a good found family. It does not really have a lot of spice to it that I remember at all, and it is about a girl that is going to help a group of young women who are witches in order to kind of learn how to keep their powers in check while they're all together, and she along the way meets a young man that is helping these girls as well. Then Jodel8622 wants a fantasy romance that is slow burn where they get together and stay together without betrayal or a third act breakup. For this one, I knew right off the bat what I was going to recommend, and that is Blood Mercy by Bella Roth. This is definitely a slower burn, but they are solid. Like, this is one of those relationships where it doesn't really have conflict within the characters in their romance. The conflict is all external, which I really enjoyed. Cassia is the bastard daughter of a king, and she is a human. And then we have Leo, who is a Hespertine, or a type of vampire, and they are coming together to have a summit to try to find peace. Leo is a cinnamon roll, and Cassia is not really a badass, but she definitely has her moments, and I love the relationship between the two of these. This is definitely a very slow moving plot. It is definitely an epic fantasy romance, an epic world, but I love it so much and the politics in this are so intriguing and I cannot wait to continue on in this series. Next up, Gabby Likes to Read wants a fantasy book with political intrigue, little to no spice if there is romance. Two recommendations for this one. The first is The Tethered Mage by Melissa Caruso, I think is the author of that one. I did not love this book because of the types of politics. It is heavily political, but the politics are definitely more a behind the scenes conniving. Everyone's kind of talking about how they're going to move the pieces around kind of politics, whereas I tend to be more of a fan of the we have these politics and we're going to set them into motion and see what happens kind of thing. So it's definitely depending on which kind of politics that you like, but I know some of my patrons love this book, and I've heard that the second book is even better. It has a pretty unique magic system, and I think that it would definitely fit this prompt. And then we also have The Emperor's Blades by Brian Stavley. This has little to no romance in it, and it is an epic world with pretty heavy politics. It's following three siblings and the aftermath of their father's death, where one is going to need to become the emperor, one is trying to learn how to become one of the Ketrel, and he is like one of the warriors, and then the daughter that is set at home when their father dies, and she's kind of trying to figure out and manipulate all of these politics and try to figure out how to keep the realm alive while her father is dead and she's waiting on her brother to return. So I definitely think there is a heavy political subplot in this. It has a very unique magic system and I am thoroughly enjoying this series. I just finished book 2. Next up, MS Benny 1007 is looking for a space or underwater thriller, read S.A. Barnes and had a great time with it but needs more. Underwater thriller, I got you. Now both of these are, I would say, a little bit more horror than thriller, but I definitely think that they would still fit the vibes. They're underwater, not space. I was looking for another space one and I was coming up a little bit blank as far as a space thriller. But if you're looking for an underwater, I got you. Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This one is a little bit slower, very science heavy. So I think that this would kind of work for sci-fi and underwater because it is got a lot of science. This one scared the crap out of me because it felt so real to me. Like I said, extremely slow. The thriller's gonna pick up in the second half, but it's just so good. It's about a girl that's sister goes off on a mockumentary and some of the footage comes back from the mockumentary and something has killed the entire crew and that ship has gone completely missing. So she is going to gather a group of people herself amongst a lot of other scientists and other people to go out and do a real documentary on what happened to this mockumentary. So good. And then we also have From Below by Darcy Coates. This one is also making a film that they are going to be investigating a ship that sunk many years ago. It has a little bit of like a ghost vibe to it and it is definitely thrilling because I was on the edge of my seat for this entire book. Next up we have Read with Hillary, and Hillary wants a sapphic fantasy romance where one of the MCs is a knight and wields a sword. She said, can't spell treason without T and immediately needed more. For this one I think I'm going to recommend Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher. Very different vibes than the T. Kingfisher that I was mentioning earlier in the video. Sword Heart is more of a quirky main character. It doesn't quite fit the recommendation because it's not sapphic. It is a heterosexual relationship, but it fits all the other boxes. So hopefully it is pretty close. I also need more sapphic fantasy romance in my life, so if you've got any recommendations, leave them down in the comments. But basically this is a girl who is being cast away and she pulls a sword from a sheath and a man appears and he has been trapped in this sword and is going to help her escape her fate. Like I said, it's very quirky, very fun, very cozy, and hopefully it fits the recommendation. Next up, Val W3774 is looking for a Friends to Lovers romantasy, and Friends to Lovers romantasy is hard for me. It is not a trope that I read very much. Blood Mercy would absolutely fit within this camp, but I also wanted to recommend Radiance. There, it's kind of glaring on you. Radiance by Grace Draven. This is absolutely a... They become a friends to lovers. I definitely think this fits the friends to lovers trope. We have a human and we have a Kai, and the Kai are not human. They are like a little bit more gray. They have talons, and she is a human with big eyes, and they think each other is kind of repulsive, but they need to marry one another in order to bring peace to the kingdom, and they slowly learn to appreciate the differences between one another, and that leads to love between friends. It's got really good banter, but in a friends kind of way, not necessarily in an enemies banter kind of way, and I know that this book is extremely well loved, so I think that I'm going to be recommending this one. Then Carrie's Bookish Corner 2864 is looking to find more thriller and horror with an isolated setting, especially in a snowy, icy setting. Girl, for you, I have got Voices in the Snow by Darcy Coates. If you have not read this book yet, you absolutely should. This is a horror series, actually, and it is very much so set in the snow. I really, really enjoyed this series. I don't want to tell you too much. It's post-apocalyptic, and it is extremely isolated. The two main characters are set in a house for pretty much the entirety of this book, just within his house. They cannot leave, they cannot go anywhere, and they are stuck. There is snow, and there are creatures out there trying to get them. Basically, there was something that swept through the entire world, taking big city by big city and turning people into monsters. And now she has got to try to figure out how to get to her sister before disaster strikes them. So I really, really, really enjoyed this one. Darcy Coates also has another one that I would recommend, The Dead of Winter. It is a little bit more of a one-by-one thriller. So if you're looking for a horror, I would suggest this one. If you're looking for a one-by-one horror thriller, Dead of Winter. Next up, Read with Dr. B is looking for a book that will make me sob uncontrollably as someone who doesn't cry when reading. This one was a tad bit more challenging because I'm also not a crier. I will cry at shows, hands down. I will cry at life stuff or when you make me mad, hands down. But books have a hard time making me cry. So I went back and I thought, okay, what is the book that was most likely to make me cry? And this is going to be like a completely off the wall type recommendation. You're going to look at this and go, Mel, why are you recommending that for a book that makes you cry? But Maria also said it, so I think it counts. And I'm pretty sure there's footage somewhere on the internet of Cassidy sobbing while reading this book. And that is Fireborn by Rosie Aramunda. Specifically, the ending of this one will break your heart. And this book just has characters that really pulled me in, a plot that sucked me in to the point where anything that happened to them, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to start crying. Like, this cannot happen to my babies. So I think that this one is going to be the closest that I can recommend just for the types of books that I read and the type of reader that I am. This is a dragon, rebellion, and revolution type fantasy. There is a competition element to this first one. It is young adult, but in a young adult way that really hammers some good topics, and I think it's done extremely well. Then Shades of Fiction is looking for an adult epic fantasy with a political driven story and romance with little to no spice. So, I think for this one I have two recommendations. The first one is going to be Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. This one is not as politically driven, although there are definitely politics, but it has a good romance to it and it is an epic fantasy. I definitely feel like it blurs the line between new adult and adult, probably more in the new adult range, but I just love this series so much, so I couldn't let this entire video go without recommending it. This is a little bit of a sci-fi take to it. It's kind of like Star Wars meets fantasy. It has a sapphic romance to it, which I think is a ton of fun, and it is following two siblings, one that watched his sister be taken away and she now helps to wield power for the Empire, and then the brother who is wanting nothing but to get his sister back and despises the Empire for everything that they have done to him. So good, so good. Again, this has a sapphic relationship in it. It also has a heterosexual relationship in it too, but it's just so good. And then I'm pretty sure that there's a romance that comes into this at some point, but talk about political intrigue and politically driven. Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons. I think this would absolutely fit this, and there's definitely more romance that comes in further along into the series. It's not a romantasy, neither one of them are, so there's no spice. It's definitely off page, any type of romance that happens, but the romance itself is on page. This one is just really, really good. It has footnotes and it's told from two different points of view, but the points of view are basically following the same character just in two different timelines. There's definitely some time wonkiness that happens in here, a lot of really good politics. I don't want to tell you too much about the Ruin of Kings because I honestly feel like it's something that you should just kind of go into and experience for yourself, but I do think that it would fit as a recommendation for this. Next up, we had a couple from Instagram, and Blue Andrea is looking for a mentor-mentee book. A.F. Simmons Romance 21 is also looking for a mentee-mentor relationship. Not sure if you were really looking for fantasy romance, but that's probably what you're going to get. Although, I could also suggest Red Sister up here for mentor-mentee that is not a fantasy romance. It's more of like a school setting, so the mentor is her teachers, and she's kind of the mentee because she's in class, so I don't know if that truly fits, but I feel like it fits. But there's two that I wanted to recommend. The obvious one is Blood and Steel by Helen Scher. I feel like when you hear mentor-mentee romantasy trope, this is the one that comes up the most. This is set in the world of Thesmar, where there are shadow creatures trying to take over the realm, and there's a prophecy that a woman wielding the sword will take down the empire, and so women have not been able to touch a sword for many years, but Thea is determined. She loves to fight, and she wants to become a warrior of Thesmar. It is definitely enemies to lovers or reluctant allies to lovers as well. And then I think I'm gonna say Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. This is not mentor-mentee in the typical sense. They are definitely enemies, but they do have a moment where he is teaching her and she is needing to learn from him. That is a pretty big part of this story, so I think it counts. This one significantly spicier than the first Blood and Steel and absolutely spicier than Red Sister, but it is just so much fun. This is following a girl who is the daughter of the king, but she has no magic, and so he has sequestered her away and nobody has seen her for years. When she escapes and falls into the hands of the rebellion, and Dacker is going to make sure that she cannot leave because she is a little traitor. Then Chan Knoll is looking for a romantasy to escape to when life becomes too much. I think for this one I'm going to recommend A Court This Cruel and Lovely by Stasia Stark. This is a completed 4-book fantasy romance series that is epic and sweeping and so fast-paced that I think it will absolutely hold your attention when life gets to be a little bit overwhelming. It's a great escapism book, reluctant allies to lovers with some great friendships and epic fantasy plotline in it as well. This has time magic and is following Priska, who is one of the corrupted, I can't remember exactly what they call them. Yeah, corrupted. And basically those are the people that have managed to keep their magic, and if they're ever found out, they are burned. When she is found out, she tries to escape and falls into the hands of a green-eyed man who is going to help her learn more about her magic. Love this series, would highly recommend it. The Reading Apprentice is looking for a short fantasy book or a good fantasy graphic novel series. I don't typically read graphic novels, so for a short fantasy book, I think I'm going to recommend The Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. This one is really good. I enjoyed it a lot. It's following a girl and a big winged bird, so that's definitely very different. It is a novella, which is great. And then the Njungo, Trials of Njungo. I cannot find that book for anything, but I will leave a picture of it up here. It is a short fantasy about a boy that goes off in search of water in order to try to save his ailing mother. I believe this is going to be a series of novellas, so that is a really interesting take, and so hopefully one of these two will fit your request. Infusion of Violets is looking for a fantasy that is not too spicy and won't overwhelm her with world building. And I think for a beginner fantasy, there are a couple. Ashes of the Sun definitely would count for this one. It was kind of my first thought when I was thinking of different fantasies. Two other ones I could recommend are The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. None of these are super romantasy heavy. I know you mentioned Sarah J Maas, but these are definitely a little bit more fantasy based, although they do have romance subplots to them. This one is following bone shard magic, where you take bones and create constructs, which could be spiders or scorpions or cats or that are made of bones, and the daughter of the emperor that is going to have to soon take over, and there are lands that live on water, and it's a really cool magic system. I am struggling with the later books in the series, but I did really enjoy that one, so I wanted to mention it. And then Elantris by Brandon Sanderson I also think would be a good place to start. Elantris is definitely a beginner fantasy. It's not, to me, super hard to follow, but has great politics to it, and definitely usually has a romantic subplot to it as well. This is a religion-based fantasy, currently a standalone, so I think it would be a great starting point. Shades of Fiction is looking for an adult epic fantasy series with an older MC, political intrigue, and romance. I am not going to be able to give you one, I think, that has a lot of romance to it, unfortunately. I am striking out on the romance side of things, but I do want to recommend Deathless by Rob J. Hayes for an older MC and politics. This guy is, I think, in his 60s. They don't really say exactly how old, old, but he is the king of the empire, and the empire is helping being ruled by these angels, and you definitely have to be very pious and do everything that the angels say. There are politics in that he is trying to figure out how to get away from the angels while also not letting them know what is going on. This is part of a trilogy of trilogies, however. There is no recommended order, but Rob J. Hayes is putting them out in a way that he wrote all the first books, and they are set across 3,000 years. So we have one that's 3,000 years ago, one that's 1,000 years ago, and one that is more in the present. Deathless is the middle book, so I would probably recommend either reading Herald or Demon before you go into Deathless. I read Demon and then Deathless. Both are pretty short though, so should be pretty easy and quick to get through, but Deathless is the one that fits your request the most. Then we have The Booked Path, that is looking for a treasure hunt book for adults that gives them all the feels of Goonies and Natural Treasure meets Indiana Jones, but without the ex-government agent, professor, or pirate being the MC. For this one, I think that The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan is absolutely going to be the recommendation for you. It definitely gives me sweeping adventure vibes. He is not looking for an artifact, but he is on the hunt to figure out who killed his father. Along the way, there are going to be a lot of different things that he has to investigate, and it definitely gives me Indiana Jones feels, so hopefully this one works really well for you. Okay guys, so I think that those are all that I'm going to have time for today. Thank you so much for sending in your requests and recommendations. Again, if I did not get to yours, I will try to go and put my recommendation and comment back to you so that you will still have a book. Some of these I just was really struggling, and if I was, then I will definitely comment back and let you know that, and hopefully others will be able to see that and help give you more recommendations. If you guys were just here and hanging out, leave me an emoji of your choice. Leave me a completely random, ultra specific emoji. I want to see what you guys can come up with. If you're looking for more recommendation videos, I will leave that up here for you. If you want any recommendations and I did not mention it in this video, leave it in the comments below and I will try to comment back and give you a recommendation if I have one. As always, links to my Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads are all in the description box below. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe if you want to, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!